The bakery always seemed to exist in a world slightly softer than the one outside, as if time itself slowed down the moment you stepped through its door. On mornings touched by rain or snow, that feeling deepened, wrapping the space in a quiet kind of magic that Lily had come to treasure. From behind the counter, she could watch the world unfold, through wide, fog-kissed windows, raindrops tracing gentle paths down the glass, or snowflakes drifting lazily from the sky, settling on rooftops, street lamps, and the shoulders of passers-by. The outside world felt distant, muted, like a painting in motion, while inside the bakery everything was warm, golden, and alive. A soft glow filled the room, cast by strings of fairy lights, draped carefully along the walls and across the ceiling. Their gentle shimmer reflected off polished wood surfaces and glass jars filled with sugar, flour, and colourful sprinkles, creating a quiet sparkle that made even ordinary objects feel special. The light wasn't harsh or bright, but comforting, like the steady glow of a candle on a winter evening. It invited people to linger, to sit a little longer than they planned, to breathe a little deeper. The air itself carried a kind of sweetness that was impossible to ignore. The rich aroma of freshly ground coffee blended seamlessly with the buttery scent of baked goods, while hints of caramelized sugar lingered softly in the background. It was the kind of smell that didn't just greet you, it embraced you, stirring memories of childhood kitchens, holidays, and simple happy moments long past. Each breath felt warm, familiar, and reassuring, like returning to a place you didn't realize you had missed. Even the sounds within the bakery seemed to move gently, never disturbing the calm. The quiet hum of the oven, the soft clink of ceramic cups, and the faint rustle of pages from a newspaper created a subtle rhythm that blended with the steady patter of rain or the hushed stillness of falling snow outside. Nothing was rushed, nothing was loud. Everything existed in a kind of peaceful harmony. To Lily, this atmosphere was more than just comforting, it was essential. It was what transformed the bakery from a simple place of business into something far more meaningful. Here, warmth wasn't only something you could feel from the oven. It lived in the light, in the scent, in the quiet presence of others sharing the same space. On days when the world outside felt cold or uncertain, the bakery became a small sanctuary, a place where time softened, worries eased, and something as simple as a cup of tea or a freshly baked cookie could make everything feel just a little bit better. Lily never woke abruptly. Her mornings unfolded the way light slowly fills a room, quietly, gently, without urgency. Before opening her eyes, she would lie still for a moment listening. Sometimes it was the soft tapping of rain against the window, other times the hushed stillness of snowfall, or the faint whisper of morning fog pressing against the glass. These small sounds grounded her, reminding her that the world was already awake in its own quiet way, even before she was. When she finally stirred, she stretched slowly beneath her blankets, tracing small circles with her toes, as if easing herself back into her body. There was no rush, no sharp transition from rest to movement, only a gradual return. Slipping her feet into her soft slippers, she made her way to the kitchen, guided more by habit than thought. The air still held the coolness of early morning, untouched and undisturbed. The first ritual of her day was always the same: tea. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then paused, listening as the water began its slow transformation. The quiet hum, the rising bubbles, it was a sound she found endlessly comforting. While she waited, she measured out her tea leaves with care, placing them into a small infuser and lowering it gently into her favorite mug. These motions were simple, familiar, yet never meaningless. Each step held a quiet intention, as though even the smallest action deserved attention. When the water was ready, she poured it slowly, watching as the clear liquid deepened into warm shades of amber and gold. The swirling patterns fascinated her every time, as if no two mornings ever produced the same design. She would stand there for a moment, longer than necessary, just observing, letting herself be fully present in that single ordinary act. With her tea prepared, Lily carried the mug to her window seat, wrapping her hands around it and feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. Outside, the world revealed itself gradually. A thin layer of mist might drift between the houses, softening their edges, or the rain might fall in gentle, steady lines, blurring the outlines of the street. On colder mornings, snow would gather, silently, transforming everything into something softer, quieter, almost dreamlike. She didn't simply look, she noticed the way the light shifted behind clouds, the faint movement of tree branches in the distance, the stillness of neighboring homes, most of them not yet awake. These details, small and easily overlooked, felt important to her. They gave shape to the morning, grounding her in the present moment. In those early hours, there was no need to think ahead or look back. The day had not yet asked anything of her. There were no expectations, no demands, only the quiet invitation to exist, to observe, to breathe. Lily cherished this space more than anything. It was where she felt most like herself, untouched by the noise and pace of the outside world. Taking a slow sip of her tea, she would close her eyes briefly, letting the warmth settle within her. It was never just about the drink. It was about the pause, the stillness, the deliberate choice to begin her day with calm rather than haste. And in that quiet beginning, she found something rare and steady, a sense of peace that would carry her gently into whatever the day might bring. Stepping outside always felt like crossing a quiet threshold between two worlds. Behind her, the warmth of her home lingered in soft traces of faint heat, the memory of tea, the stillness of early morning. Ahead, the street stretched out beneath a sky, softened by rain, fog, or snow depending on the day. Lily paused for just a moment at her doorstep, taking in the air. It was cool and clean, carrying with it a subtle freshness that seemed to wash everything anew. Then, with a small content breath, she began her walk to the bakery. On rainy mornings, she would open her umbrella, a cheerful green canopy dotted with bright yellow circles, its curved handle shaped like a duck's head. The gentle patter of raindrops against the fabric created a soft, steady rhythm above her, like a quiet companion accompanying each step. The pavement glistened with shallow puddles, reflecting blurred images of houses and street lamps, and occasionally she would step carefully through them, watching the ripples spread outward in delicate circles. When the fog rolled in, the world felt closer, more intimate. Buildings softened into vague outlines, and distant shapes faded into pale grey. Sounds became muted, yet somehow more present. The soft echo of her footsteps, the distant creak of a gate, the whisper of leaves brushing against one another. Lily found herself moving a little slower on these mornings, as if matching the hush that the fog seemed to impose on everything around her. Snow brought a different kind of quiet. It settled gently over rooftops, fences, and branches, smoothing out the sharp edges of the world. Her boots pressed softly into the fresh layer, leaving behind a trail of footprints that felt oddly personal, as though she were marking her presence in an otherwise untouched landscape. Occasionally, she would glance up, letting a snowflake land on her glove or brush against her cheek, smiling at the fleeting, delicate contact. Along the way, small familiar details greeted her like old friends. She often looked toward her neighbor's window, where two cats, one black, one white, liked to curl together on the sill. Some mornings, one would be watching the street with quiet curiosity, while the other rested their shapes, forming a soft, mirrored pattern. Seeing them always brought a quiet sense of comfort, a reminder that even in stillness, there was companionship. The neighborhood itself felt suspended in that early hour. Curtains remained, drawn doors closed, and only the occasional flicker of movement hinted at life within. Lily didn't mind the solitude. In fact, she cherished it. These moments, walking alone through a world not yet fully awake, gave her space to simply be, to notice, to feel, to exist without distraction. As she continued, the familiar outline of the bakery slowly emerged from the softened distance. Its colorful door, though muted by weather, stood as a quiet promise at the end of her path. Even when hidden by fog or veiled by falling snow, she always knew exactly where it was. The walk itself was never just a means of getting there. It was a gentle transition, a gradual unfolding from the quiet of her morning into the warmth and life waiting just beyond that door. Unlocking the bakery door was always a small, meaningful ritual, one that marked the quiet beginning of everything that would follow. Lily would pause for just a heartbeat as she slipped the key into the lock, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers, before turning it with a soft, familiar click. The sound echoed gently in the stillness of the early morning, like a signal that the day was ready to begin. As she pushed the door open, a subtle shift occurred, as though she were stepping not just into a space, but into a feeling she knew by heart. The air inside greeted her first. It held the lingering warmth of the day before, mixed with a delicate blend of scents that never quite faded. Roasted coffee beans, rich and slightly bitter, wove together with the sweet trace of baked sugar and butter. There was even a faint hint of caramelized edges from yesterday's cookies, a scent that reminded her of toasted marshmallows and quiet evenings. It was a fragrance that felt alive, layered with memory, and every time she inhaled it, something inside her settled. She closed the door gently behind her, shaking out her umbrella and leaving it by the entrance before stepping further in. Her footsteps were soft against the wooden floor, each one familiar, each one grounding. For a brief moment, the bakery remained dim, holding on to the last traces of night. Then, with a small practiced motion, she reached for the switch. Light spilled into the room, not harsh or sudden, but warm and golden. It filled the corners, slowly brushing against the shelves, the tables, and the glass jars lined neatly along the walls. Still, it wasn't complete until she walked over to the seating area and bent slightly to plug in the strand of fairy lights. One by one, they flickered to life, tiny points of soft illumination stretching across the space like a constellation brought indoors. Their gentle glow transformed everything, adding a quiet magic that overhead lights alone could never achieve. This was the moment Lily loved most. Standing there, surrounded by warmth and light, she felt a quiet sense of arrival, not just physically, but emotionally. The outside world, with its rain or snow or drifting fog, seemed to fade into the background. Here inside these walls, everything felt steady, safe, and familiar. The bakery was no longer empty. It was waiting. She took a slow breath, letting the scents deepen as the space awakened around her. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant creak of settling wood, even the soft rustle of her own movement, all of it blended into a quiet symphony of presence. Nothing demanded her attention, yet everything invited it. To Lily, this wasn't just the start of a workday. It was a return to a place where every detail held meaning, where warmth lived not only in the oven, but in the atmosphere itself. In these first moments, before the customers arrived and before the day unfolded, the bakery belonged entirely to stillness and possibility. And in that stillness, Lily always felt most at home. Baking cookies was never just a task for Lily. It was a quiet, almost meditative process, one that invited her to slow down even further and immerse herself completely in the present moment. After the bakery had come to life with light and warmth, she would move toward the pantry with a sense of calm purpose, already picturing the familiar steps ahead. The shelves greeted her with their orderly rows of ingredients, each one waiting patiently to be chosen. She began by gathering everything she needed, placing each item carefully on the wooden counter. Flour, soft and pale, sifted lightly between her fingers as she measured it into a bowl. White sugar followed, crystalline and bright. Then brown sugar, darker and richer, carrying with it a faint molasses scent that hinted at warmth and depth. She added a small splash of vanilla extract, its fragrance blooming instantly in the air, sweet, comforting, and unmistakably familiar. Nearby, chocolate chips rested in their bag, glossy and dark, promising little pockets of melted indulgence in every bite. From the refrigerator, she retrieved eggs and baking soda, along with butter that had been left to soften just enough to yield easily under pressure. Each ingredient had its moment, its place in the rhythm of the process. Lily worked without hurry, separating dry and wet components into different bowls, stirring each mixture with slow, deliberate movement. The gentle sound of a wooden spoon gliding against ceramic created a quiet, steady cadence, grounding her in the act itself. When the time came to combine everything, she poured the mixtures together, watching as separate elements gradually transformed into a cohesive dough. The texture shifted beneath her hands, from loose and grainy to smooth and pliable, until it reached that perfect consistency she had come to recognize without needing to think. Folding in the chocolate chips, she took care not to crush them, letting them settle naturally into the dough like scattered gems. With an ice cream scoop, she portioned the dough into evenly sized rounds, placing them one by one onto a prepared tray. There was a quiet satisfaction in the uniformity, in the way each small mound held the promise of something warm and golden. Once the tray was full, she slid it into the oven, closing the door gently, as if sealing in a moment of anticipation. As the cookies baked, the transformation began. The air in the bakery slowly filled with a rich, buttery aroma, layered with sweetness and the unmistakable scent of melting chocolate. It spread gradually, reaching every corner of the room, softening the space even further. Lily would often pause during this time, simply to breathe it in, letting the warmth of it settle around her like a familiar embrace. While waiting, she turned her attention to the next batch, stained glass sugar cookies. The dough, chilled and firm, rested cool beneath her palms as she rolled it out across the floured surface. With smooth, even pressure, she guided the rolling pin back and forth until the thickness was just right. Then came the shaping circles, squares, delicate forms cut cleanly with practiced ease. Using smaller cutters, she removed intricate designs from the centers, stars, trees, snowflakes, leaving behind hollow spaces that would soon be filled with color. She gathered handfuls of hard candy, sorting them by shade before placing them into small bags. With careful measured force, she crushed them into fine glittering fragments. The pieces caught the light as she spooned them into the cutout centers of each cookie, tiny bursts of red, blue, amber, and green, waiting to melt into translucent panes. Once in the oven, these cookies underwent their own quiet transformation. The candy softened and fused, creating a smooth, glass-like surface held gently within the golden frame of the dough. When Lily opened the oven, a wave of warmth greeted her, carrying with it a scent both sweet and slightly caramelized. As she placed the finished cookies onto cooling racks, she allowed herself a small, contented smile. Each batch was more than just a product. It was the result of care, patience, and attention. In these moments, surrounded by the soft clatter of trays and the lingering scent of sugar and butter, Lily felt deeply connected to what she was creating. Baking to her was not just about making something delicious. It was about shaping warmth into something that could be shared, one cookie at a time. The bakery rarely stayed quiet for long. Not after the first batch of cookies had come out of the oven and the warm, inviting scent had begun to drift through the doorway. and into the street. It was almost as if that aroma carried an unspoken invitation, one that the regulars understood without needing to be told. As expected, Seamus was the first to arrive. The bell above the door gave a soft, familiar chime as he stepped inside, bringing with him a trace of the cool morning air. He shook the dampness from his coat and adjusted the folded newspaper, tucked neatly under his arm, his eyes already scanning the room with a quiet sense of routine. There was something comforting about the predictability of his visits, like the steady rhythm of the bakery itself. "Morning, Lily," he said, his voice warm, carrying just a hint of playful curiosity. "Good morning, Seamus," she replied, with a gentle smile, already reaching for his cup before he even asked. She poured his coffee the way she always did, steady, unhurried, and slid it across the wooden counter toward him. He accepted it with a nod of quiet appreciation, wrapping his hands around the cup as if grounding himself in its warmth. "What's in the oven today?" he asked, glancing toward the kitchen with a hopeful look that hadn't changed in years. "Chocolate chip sugar and stained glass cookies," Lily answered. He raised an eyebrow, a small grin forming. "Well, I suppose someone has to make sure they've turned out properly." Lily let out a soft laugh. "Of course, I couldn't possibly do this without your expert opinion." With that, Seamus made his way to his usual seat by the window, settling in with his coffee and newspaper. From there, he could watch the street slowly come to life, just as he always did, occasionally glancing up as people passed or as the weather shifted its quiet patterns outside. Not long after, the door chimed again. Rose entered with a gentle energy that seemed to brighten the room in a different way. She paused just inside the doorway, brushing a bit of moisture from her coat before stepping fully into the warmth. Her cheeks carried a faint pink from the cold, and her eyes lit up almost immediately as she caught the scent of fresh baking. "It smells wonderful in here," she said, her voice soft but full of genuine delight. "It's a good day for something sweet," Lily replied, handing her a cup of coffee without needing to ask. Rose accepted it gratefully, cradling the cup in both hands, as though it were something precious. She moved toward a seat nearby, close enough to exchange a few words with Seamus, who greeted her with a nod and a brief comment about the weather. Their conversation was light, easy, made up of small observations and shared familiarity rather than anything urgent or important. As the morning unfolded, more customers began to arrive, each one bringing their own quiet presence into the space. A young family with 2 small children wandered in, the little ones immediately drawn to the corner, set aside just for them. A couple paused near the counter, speaking in hushed tones as they decided what to order. Others came alone, seeking a moment of calm before the rest of their day began. Lily moved among them with a natural ease, never rushed, never distant. She remembered names, preferences, small details that made each interaction feel personal. A favorite pastry here, an extra sprinkle of sugar there. Tiny gestures that carried more meaning than they might seem. The conversations that filled the bakery were soft and overlapping like threads woven gently together. Laughter rose and fell, without ever becoming overwhelming. Even in its liveliness, the space remained calm, held together by a shared sense of comfort. To Lily, these interactions were as essential as the baking itself. The cookies and coffee brought people in, but it was these small exchanges, these familiar faces, these moments of connection that gave the bakery its true warmth. In every greeting, every smile, every quiet conversation, the space became more than just a place to visit. It became a place where people belonged. By the time the cookie decorating party began, the bakery had transformed into something brighter, fuller, alive, with a kind of warmth that could not be created by ovens alone. It started quietly, as most things in Lily's world did, with a few early arrivals choosing their seats and glancing curiously at the neatly arranged tables. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the space began to fill, not just with people, but with energy. Each table had been carefully prepared. Bowls of colourful sprinkles, tiny spheres of gold and silver, delicate rods of pastel pink and blue, shimmering crystals of sugar, sat beside tubes of icing in every shade imaginable. There were flakes of coconut, curls of chocolate, crushed peppermint, and small jars filled with edible decorations that caught the light like little treasures. In the center of it all stood a metal tree, its branches waiting patiently to be adorned with finished creations. The door chimed again and again as more guests arrived, families, friends, neighbors, and familiar faces who returned year after year. Some came in with laughter already on their lips, others with a quiet kind of anticipation, but all were greeted by the same gentle welcome that Lily offered to everyone who stepped inside. "Take any table you like," she would say, with a soft smile gesturing toward the spread of cookies and decorations. Soon, the room filled with the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, and the light rhythmic sounds of creativity at work. The squeeze of icing tubes, the shake of sprinkle jars, the soft tap of cookies being set down on plates, each small noise layered into a comforting symphony of shared activity. Children were often the first to fully surrender to the moment. Small hands reached eagerly for the brightest decorations, carefully, or sometimes not so carefully, pressing them into soft icing. Their faces lit up with concentration and delight, tongues peeking out slightly as they focused on each tiny detail. Nearby, parents watched with fond smiles, occasionally offering guidance, but more often simply enjoying the joy unfolding in front of them. At another table, a couple worked quietly, side by side, decorating matching cookies with thoughtful precision. Across the room, Seamus examined his latest creation with mock seriousness before declaring it officially approved, earning a few amused glances from those nearby. Rose, seated comfortably with her coffee within reach, added delicate patterns to her cookies, her movements calm and practiced, as though she were painting rather than decorating. Lily moved gently among them, offering refills of coffee, small words of encouragement, and the occasional suggestion when someone wasn't quite sure what to do next. She didn't direct the activity. She simply supported it, allowing each person to shape their own experience. Every cookie that took form on those tables was different, carrying the personality of its creator in every swirl of icing and scatter of sugar. As time passed, the metal tree began to fill. One by one, decorated cookies were hung from its branches, some carefully crafted, others delightfully imperfect. Snowflakes dusted with powdered sugar, bright stained glass cookies glowing softly in the light, tiny figures adorned with scarves and smiles, they all found their place, transforming the tree into something both whimsical and deeply personal. The bakery, once quiet and still in the early morning, now hummed with life. Yet, even in its fullness, it never felt overwhelming. The warmth held everything together. The golden light, the familiar scents, the gentle rhythm of voices blending into one another. At one point, a child near the window suddenly paused and pointed outside. "It's snowing," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. The room softened. Conversations slowed, then quieted, as people turned their gaze toward the glass beyond it. Delicate snowflakes drifted down, catching the light as they settled over the world outside. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The laughter, the movement, the gentle bustle, all gave way to a shared stillness. Lily stood among them, taking it all in. There was something almost indescribable about that moment. Not just the beauty of the snowfall, but the feeling within the room. The quiet togetherness, the sense that everyone, in their own way, had arrived, not just at a place, but at a feeling. As the chatter slowly returned and the decorating continued, that feeling remained woven into every smile, Every small exchange, every carefully decorated cookie. The party was not just an event, it was a gathering of moments of people of warmth, shared freely and without expectation. And standing there, surrounded by it all, Lily knew that this simple, joyful coming together was the true heart of the bakery. Nature never felt separate from the bakery. It moved alongside it, quietly shaping the rhythm of each day and the emotions that unfolded within it. For Lily, the weather was not something to be observed from a distance, but something to be felt, absorbed, and understood in its own quiet language. Rain in particular carried a kind of gentle intimacy. On days when it fell, in soft, steady lines, tapping lightly against the windows, it created a sense of enclosure, as if the world outside had drawn a curtain, allowing everything within the bakery to feel more contained, more personal. The sound itself was soothing, a constant, delicate rhythm that softened thoughts and slowed time. It made conversations quieter, movements gentler, and even laughter seem warmer, wrapped in a layer of calm. Fog brought something different, something more mysterious. It blurred the edges of the familiar, turning ordinary streets and neighboring houses into shapes half seen and half imagined. In its presence the world felt smaller, closer, as though everything beyond a certain distance had been gently erased. Lily often found herself lingering at the window on such mornings, watching the way the mist shifted and folded in on itself. It invited reflection, encouraging her to turn inward, to sit with her thoughts without urgency or distraction. And then there was snow. Snow transformed everything. When the first flakes began to fall, they carried with them a hush that settled over the world like a soft blanket. Sounds grew quieter, footsteps softened, and even the air seemed to slow. The outside world, once full of motion and detail, became simplified, reduced to light and shadow, white and grey stillness and breath. It was in these moments that Lily felt something almost childlike awaken within her, a quiet sense of wonder that she never quite lost, no matter how many winters passed. Watching the snow fall through the bakery windows, she often felt a subtle shift inside herself. The steady calm of her morning deepened into something more reflective, more expansive. It was as if the snow carried a reminder of time passing gently, of change that came without force, of beauty that existed without needing to be held. Sometimes she would step outside just for a moment. There, beneath the open sky, she would tilt her face upward, letting the cold flakes brush against her skin. The sensation was fleeting, almost weightless, yet unmistakably real. It grounded her in a way that nothing else quite could. In those brief moments, she wasn't thinking about the bakery, or the tasks of the day, or even the people inside waiting for her return. She was simply present, standing in the quiet, feeling the world as it was. Back inside, the warmth of the bakery seemed even richer in contrast. The golden light, the scent of sugar and coffee, the soft murmur of voices, all of it felt deeper, more meaningful, as though shaped by the stillness outside. For Lily, these shifting patterns of rain, fog, and snow were more than just background. They were part of the story, part of the feeling that lived within the bakery itself. They reminded her that life did not need to be loud or fast to be full. Sometimes it was in the quietest moments, in the fall of snow, the hush of fog, the rhythm of rain, that something truly meaningful revealed itself. As the gentle rhythm of the day continued, Lily found herself returning to the counter for something a little different, something slower, richer, and quietly indulgent. The cookies had filled the bakery with warmth and sweetness, but now it was time for fudge, a treat that carried its own kind of comfort. She reached for a well-worn recipe card, its edges softened by time and faintly smudged with cocoa fingerprints. Just holding it was enough to stir a familiar memory, like revisiting a story she had read countless times and never tired of. The process began simply. She gathered her ingredients, chocolate chips smooth and dark, and a can of sweetened condensed milk, thick and pale. There was something satisfying about the simplicity of it, how such rich flavour could come from so few components. Setting up her double boiler, she filled the lower pot with water and placed the upper pan gently on top. As the heat rose, the chocolate began its quiet transformation. At first, it softened almost imperceptibly, holding its shape while giving way at the edges. Then slowly, it melted into a glossy pool, thick and smooth, catching the light with every careful stir of her wooden spoon. Lily watched closely, not out of necessity but out of appreciation. There was a certain beauty in this change from solid to liquid, from separate pieces to something unified and flowing. When she added the condensed milk, the mixture deepened, becoming silkier, richer. The scent that rose from the pot was immediate and enveloping warm chocolate, slightly sweet with a depth that felt almost luxurious. It lingered in the air, weaving itself into the already comforting atmosphere of the bakery. She decided to make a few variations, each one shaped by memory as much as by taste. For the first batch she added a touch of peppermint extract. The sharp, cool fragrance cut gently through the richness, bringing with it a sense of winter, of crisp air and quiet evenings. She poured the mixture into a lined pan, the thick chocolate spreading slowly as it settled. Then came the finishing touch, crushed candy canes, their red and white fragments scattered across the surface like tiny bursts of colour. For the next batch she reached for something softer, warmer, hazelnuts. As she stirred them into the chocolate, their subtle aroma blended seamlessly with the sweetness, creating something rounder, more comforting. She pressed a few whole nuts gently into the top, knowing each piece would carry that delicate crunch. The final batch was for herself, a hint of orange zest, bright and fragrant, followed by a few pieces of candied peel. The citrus note lifted the chocolate, giving it a quiet complexity that lingered just a little longer on the palate. It was a small indulgence, one she rarely spoke of, but always appreciated. As the fudge cooled on the racks, the bakery seemed to settle into a softer rhythm once more. The earlier energy of the gathering had mellowed into something quieter. Low conversations, the occasional clink of cups, the gentle hum of contentment. Rose sat nearby, cradling her coffee, her eyes drifting toward the trays with a knowing smile. She didn't need to ask what flavors were being made. She could already tell. "I can smell the hazelnut," she said softly, almost to herself. Lily smiled in return, wiping her hands on her apron. "I thought you might." There was no rush to serve it, no urgency to complete the moment. The fudge would be ready when it was ready, just as everything else in the bakery unfolded in its own time. In the meantime, Lily allowed herself to pause, to take in the quiet details, the warmth of the room, the presence of familiar faces. These small moments woven gently between the larger ones were what gave the day its depth. Not everything needed to be grand or eventful to matter. Sometimes it was the simple act of stirring chocolate, of sharing a knowing glance, of recognizing a scent before a word was spoken that made everything feel complete. As the day gradually softened toward evening, the bakery seemed to settle into a quieter, deeper kind of calm. The laughter had faded into gentle conversation. The tables once filled with motion and colour now held the quiet remnants of shared moments. A few cookies remained on plates. Some half-finished cups of coffee cooled near the edges, and the decorated tree stood in the corner, its branches carrying small, imperfect creations that felt more meaningful than anything flawless ever could. Lily stood behind the counter for a moment, not moving, simply observing. There was nothing left that urgently needed her attention, no task calling her forward. And in that pause, she allowed herself to feel the day as a whole, not in separate pieces, but as something complete. It wasn't the baking alone that made this place special, though. She loved every part of it. It wasn't even the events, the gatherings, or the carefully prepared details. It was something quieter, something that existed between all of those things. A feeling. She saw it in the way people lingered longer than they intended, reluctant to step back out into the cold, in the way conversations unfolded slowly without pressure or purpose, in the small, thoughtful gestures, a cup of coffee offered, without being asked, a smile shared across the room, a moment of stillness at the window as snow began to fall. These were not grand moments. They were not the kind that demanded attention or left a dramatic impression, but they stayed. They settled gently into memory, becoming the kind of experiences people carried with them long after they had gone. Lily understood in a quiet and unspoken way that happiness often lived here in these small, almost invisible spaces, not in something distant or extraordinary, but in what was already present. A warm drink held between cold hands, the soft glow of light on a grey day, the comfort of familiar faces gathered in the same place, not because they had to be, but because they wanted to be. There was a kind of richness in slowing down, in allowing moments to unfold without rushing past them, in noticing instead of overlooking, in choosing presence over distraction. It was not always easy life outside these walls, moved quickly, often too quickly, but here within the bakery, a different rhythm was possible, a gentler one, and perhaps that was what made it matter, because in this small space, shaped by warmth and care, people were reminded, if only for a little while, that they did not need more to feel fulfilled. They needed less noise, less urgency, less distance from one another, more presence, more connection, more awareness of the simple things that quietly made life meaningful. Lily glanced once more around the room, her gaze resting briefly on the softly glowing lights, the empty chairs, the lingering warmth that had not yet faded. Then she allowed herself a small, contented smile. Tomorrow would come as it always did, with its own weather, its own rhythm, its own collection of small, unnoticed moments waiting to be felt. And she would be here, ready to meet them, one quiet moment at a time.
Tonight we begin a journey that does not ask you to go anywhere, to become anything, or to chase after some distant version of peace. This is not a path that leads outward toward achievement or arrival. Instead, it is a quiet turning inward, a gentle return to the place you have never truly left, the present moment. There is nothing you need to prepare, no expectations to meet, no effort required beyond simply being here right now. You can let your shoulders soften, allow your breath to slow, and give yourself permission to rest, even if just for a little while. The world outside can wait. The noise, the pressure, the endless movement of doing and becoming, it can all fade into the background for now. As you listen, notice the subtle rhythm of your breath. There is something profoundly steady about it. It has been with you through every moment of your life, through joy, through confusion, through change. It does not demand anything from you, it simply flows. In and out, rising and falling, like waves meeting the shore again and again, without effort. This journey we are taking is not about escaping life. It is about meeting it more deeply, not by controlling it, but by allowing it. Not by understanding everything, but by softening into what already is. So often we live as if peace is something far away, something we must earn, fix, or finally arrive at after everything else is in place. But what if peace has never been missing? What if it has been quietly waiting beneath the surface of every moment, patiently, gently, unnoticed? For a few moments you are invited to stop searching, to stop reaching, to simply be. Let your thoughts come and go like clouds drifting across an open sky. You don't need to hold on to them, and you don't need to push them away. They can move freely just as they always have. And beneath them, there is a stillness, a quiet presence that remains unchanged. This space you are entering now is not something new. It is something familiar, something deeply known, even if it has been forgotten in the rush of everyday life. a place where nothing is missing, a place where you are already enough, exactly as you are. There is a kind of safety here, not the kind that comes from certainty or control, but a softer kind, the safety of not needing to fight the moment, of not needing to become someone else, of not needing to fix what is already unfolding in its own way. In this space, you can let go, even if only slightly. You can rest your mind, soften your body, and allow yourself to be carried by the quiet flow of awareness. And as you settle into this gentle rhythm, you may begin to notice something subtle, a shift not in the world around you, but in the way you are meeting it. The tightness may loosen, the urgency may soften, and in its place there is a quiet openness, a sense that perhaps just for now everything is okay. This is the beginning, not of a journey forward, but of a return, a remembering, a quiet homecoming to the present moment, where nothing needs to be added and nothing needs to be taken away. So stay here just for a little while longer. Breathe gently. Let the stillness hold you. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to become. You are already here. As we continue this gentle unfolding, we arrive at a wisdom that has quietly guided countless minds toward peace. For over 2.5 millennia, the teachings of Buddha. And yet what makes this wisdom so enduring is not that it demands belief, devotion, or adherence to rigid doctrine. It does not ask you to adopt a new identity or to follow a set of unquestionable rules. Instead, it offers something far more subtle and perhaps far more powerful, an invitation to look, an invitation to notice, an invitation to see your own experience more clearly just as it is. This is what makes these teachings so different from what we often expect. There is no pressure here to agree or disagree, no requirement to understand everything at once, no expectation that you must change who you are in order to get it right. In fact, there is no right to get. There is only the quiet possibility of seeing, of becoming aware of what has always been present, but perhaps overlooked. You are not being asked to believe anything blindly. You are not being told, this is the truth, accept it. Instead, the invitation is softer, more respectful of your own inner knowing. Come and see for yourself. Not through theory, not through argument, but through direct experience. Through your breath, your thoughts, your emotions, your everyday life. This approach is deeply freeing because it places the source of understanding not outside of you, but within you. It trusts that you already have the capacity to observe, to feel, to recognize patterns, to notice what brings tension and what brings ease. It does not position you as someone lacking, but as someone capable of discovering. Imagine for a moment what it feels like to observe your thoughts without immediately identifying with them. To notice a feeling arising, perhaps irritation or restlessness or even joy, and instead of saying, "This is me," you simply acknowledge, "This is happening." There is a small but powerful shift in that perspective, a widening of space, a softening of the grip. This is the heart of the invitation. You are not being told to eliminate your thoughts or control your emotions. You are not asked to become perfectly calm or endlessly positive. Instead, you are gently guided to become curious, to watch the movements of your inner world, the way you might watch waves on the surface of the ocean, rising, falling, changing, never fixed. And in that watching, something begins to change, not because you are forcing it, but because you are no longer resisting it. Awareness itself has a quiet intelligence. When you see clearly, even for a moment, there is a natural unfolding, a natural loosening of what once felt tight. This is why the teachings are not instructions to follow, but invitations to explore. You might notice, for example, how often the mind tries to hold on to what feels good or push away what feels uncomfortable. You might see how quickly a single thought can spiral into a story and how that story can shape your entire mood. But instead of judging these patterns, the invitation is simply to notice them, gently, without criticism. Because the moment you truly see something clearly, you are no longer completely lost in it. There is a quiet distance, not of disconnection, but of understanding. And from that understanding, something begins to soften. This path is not about becoming someone new, It is about uncovering what has always been here, beneath the noise, beneath the habits, beneath the constant movement of the mind. A stillness that does not need to be created, a presence that does not need to be earned. So as you continue listening, allow yourself to receive these ideas, not as truths you must accept, but as possibilities you can explore. Let them settle gently, like seeds placed in the soil of your awareness. There is no need to rush their growth, no need to analyze or grasp them tightly. Just notice, just observe, just be present with what arises, and trust that in this simple act of seeing something meaningful is already unfolding within you. As we continue to gently explore the landscape of the mind, we come to a truth that is both simple and deeply transformative, one that sits at the very heart of human experience. It is often translated as suffering, but this word can feel heavy, even misleading. It may bring to mind extreme pain, tragedy, or visible hardship. Yet the experience we are pointing to is often much more subtle, much more familiar. A more accurate way to understand it is as a kind of inner friction, not necessarily pain, but tension, not always visible, but constantly present. It is that quiet, persistent sense that something isn't quite right, that subtle feeling of unease, even when everything appears to be fine on the surface. It can show up as restlessness when things are calm, as dissatisfaction when things are going well, or as anxiety when the future feels uncertain. This friction is not dramatic, but it is deeply human. And what gives rise to this inner friction? If we look closely, we begin to notice two underlying movements of the mind: clinging and resistance. Clinging is the tendency to hold on tightly to what feels pleasant. A moment of happiness arises, and immediately the mind whispers, "Stay, don't change, I want more of this." We try to freeze the experience, to extend it, to make it permanent. But life does not work that way. Every pleasant moment is by nature temporary. And so when it begins to fade, as all things do, we feel a subtle disappointment. Not because the moment itself was flawed, but because we tried to hold on to something that was never meant to stay. Resistance, on the other hand, is the impulse to push away what feels uncomfortable. A difficult emotion appears: frustration, sadness, irritation, and the mind reacts instantly. This shouldn't be happening. I don't want this. We tighten against it. We try to distract ourselves, suppress it, or escape it entirely. But in doing so, we create even more tension. The feeling itself may be temporary, but our resistance to it prolongs its presence and deepens its impact. This is the friction, not the experience itself, but the way we relate to it. You can see this clearly in everyday life. Imagine you are stuck in traffic. The cars are not moving, the minutes are passing, and there is nothing you can do to change the situation. The external reality is neutral. It simply is what it is. But inside, something begins to tighten. The mind resists. This shouldn't be happening. I'm going to be late. This is a waste of time. That resistance creates agitation, stress, and discomfort. Yet if for a moment you soften that resistance, if you allow the situation to be as it is, you may notice a shift. The traffic has not changed, but your experience of it has. Or consider a moment when someone says something that hurts you. The words land, and almost instantly, the mind reacts. They shouldn't have said that. They're wrong. I don't deserve this. The feeling of hurt is natural, but the resistance to it, the mental struggle against what has already happened, intensifies the suffering. The mind replays the moment, builds a story, fuels the emotion, and what began as a brief experience becomes something that lingers. This pattern is incredibly common, and yet we rarely notice it. We tend to believe that our discomfort is caused by external events, the traffic, the comment, the situation. But when we look more closely, we begin to see that the deeper source lies within the mind's reaction, the grasping, the pushing away, the subtle refusal to let life unfold as it is. This insight is not meant to blame or criticize. It is not about saying, "You should not feel this way." On the contrary, it is an invitation to understand, because Once you begin to see this pattern clearly, something shifts. You realize that the problem is not the presence of pleasant or unpleasant experiences. Those are part of life. The real source of tension is the way we hold on to them, the way we resist them, the way we try to control what is constantly changing. And in that realization, there is a quiet possibility. If the friction comes from clinging and resistance, then perhaps peace is not about changing the world around you, but about softening your relationship to it, about allowing experiences to arise and pass without tightening around them, about letting go even slightly of the need for things to be different than they are. This does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means becoming aware. It means noticing in real time when the mind begins to grasp or resist, and in that moment of noticing, creating just a little bit of space, a breath, a pause, a gentle recognition. This is friction, and in that recognition, something begins to loosen. The experience may still be there, traffic, emotion, uncertainty, but the struggle softens, the tension eases, and what remains is a more open, more spacious way of being with life. This is the beginning of freedom, not the elimination of difficulty, but the transformation of how we meet it. There is an old story carried gently through time about a young woman named Mara who lived in a quiet village at the foot of a great mountain. The village itself was simple, but Mara's work was anything but. She was a weaver and her skill was extraordinary. With patient hands and a focused mind, she created tapestries of breathtaking beauty. Threads of gold and crimson woven into patterns so intricate they seemed almost alive. People traveled from distant lands just to see her work, and many would leave with one of her creations, carrying a piece of her artistry back into their own lives. Over time, Mara became known not just as a weaver, but as the weaver. Her name became inseparable from her craft. When people spoke of beauty, they spoke of Mara. When they spoke of mastery, they spoke of her hands. And slowly, almost without noticing, Mara began to believe the same story. I am a great weaver, she would think. This is who I am. At first, this identity brought her joy. It gave her purpose, direction, and a sense of belonging. Each tapestry she completed felt like a reflection of her worth, a confirmation of who she believed herself to be. But beneath that quiet satisfaction, something else began to grow, something far less visible yet far more powerful. With every new piece, she created a subtle pressure emerged. The next tapestry had to be better than the last, the colors more vibrant, the patterns more complex, the beauty more undeniable. What had once been an act of expression slowly became an act of expectation, and with expectation came fear. At night, when the village fell silent and the world seemed to rest, Mara's mind did not. She would lie awake, staring into the darkness, her thoughts weaving patterns far more tangled than any thread on her loom. What if I fail? What if the next piece is not as beautiful? What if the inspiration disappears? The questions circled endlessly, tightening their grip with each passing night. The joy of creation, the quiet pleasure of simply weaving began to fade. In its place grew a constant sense of tension, a pressure to maintain, to prove, to protect the image she had built. Her identity, once a source of pride, had become something she needed to defend. One day, a royal messenger arrived in the village. He carried with him a request from the king himself, a commission unlike anything Mara had ever received. The king desired a tapestry that would capture the essence of the entire kingdom, its forests, its rivers, its people, its spirit. It was an honor beyond measure, a recognition of her mastery at the highest level. But instead of joy, Mara felt something else: fear. The magnitude of the task overwhelmed her. This was not just another tapestry. This was the tapestry, the one that would define her legacy, the one that had to be perfect. She built a larger loom, gathered the finest threads of silk and gold, and prepared herself to begin. But when she sat before the empty frame, her hands did not move. They trembled. The threads remained untouched. The space before her felt impossibly vast, as if it were not a canvas for creation, but a mirror reflecting her deepest doubts. Days passed, then weeks. The loom stood silent. Each morning Mara would sit before it, determined to begin. and each morning the same paralysis would take hold. The fear of not being perfect, of not living up to the identity she had built, became a cage she could not escape. The more she tried to force herself forward, the tighter the cage became. Her workshop, once filled with light and color, grew heavy with silence. The vibrant threads seemed to lose their life. The space that had once been a sanctuary of creativity became a place of tension and dread. Mara withdrew from the village. She stopped taking new orders. She avoided the people who once admired her work. And inside, the friction grew stronger. Not because she had lost her skill, but because she had become trapped in the idea of who she believed she had to be. I must be perfect. I must not fail. I must remain the great weaver. These thoughts, repeated again and again, became the walls of her prison. And this is the subtle trap of identity. What begins as a simple recognition, "This is what I do," slowly transforms into a rigid belief, "This is who I am." And once that belief takes hold, everything must serve it. Every action, every result, every outcome becomes a measure of whether we are still worthy of that identity. The problem is not the skill. The problem is not the success. The problem is the attachment. Because the moment we cling to an identity, we also create the fear of losing it. Mara was no longer just weaving tapestries. She was trying to protect an image. And in doing so, she lost the very freedom that had once allowed her to create so effortlessly. Her story is not distant from our own. We may not sit at a loom weaving threads of silk and gold, but we weave identities in other ways. Through our work, our achievements, our roles, our relationships, we tell ourselves stories. I am successful. I am capable. I am this kind of person. And while these stories may feel empowering at first, they can quietly become limiting. Because once we define ourselves in a fixed way, we begin to fear anything that challenges that definition. Failure becomes terrifying. Change becomes threatening. Uncertainty becomes unbearable. And just like Mara, we may find ourselves sitting before the loom of our own lives, unable to move, not because we lack the ability, but because we are afraid of not living up to the story we have created. This is the trap, not of failure, but of identity itself. And yet, within this recognition lies the possibility of something new, a softening, a loosening of the grip. Because if the identity is something we have constructed, then perhaps it is not something we need to hold on to so tightly. Perhaps there is a way to create, to live, to move through life, without the weight of needing to be someone fixed and unchanging. Mara had not yet discovered this. She still sat in the silence of her workshop, caught between the desire to begin and the fear of not being enough. But the moment of transformation was already approaching, and with it, the possibility of freedom. One evening, when the weight of her thoughts had grown too heavy to carry, Mara left her silent workshop and began walking toward the mountain that stood beyond the village. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the path, and the air held that quiet stillness that comes just before nightfall. She did not know exactly where she was going. She only knew that she could no longer remain where she was. The path wound gently upward, leading her away from the noise of expectation, away from the loom that had become a symbol of her fear. With each step, the tightness in her chest softened just slightly, as if the mountain itself were inviting her to breathe more deeply. After some time, she came upon a small hermitage nestled among the trees. It was simple, almost hidden, as though it belonged more to the earth than to the world of people. Outside sat an old nun, her presence calm and steady, like a quiet lake untouched by wind. Mara hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to speak. But something in the woman's stillness felt safe, and before she could stop herself, the words began to pour out. She spoke of her work, her success, the royal commission, and the fear that had taken hold of her. She spoke of the sleepless nights, the trembling hands, the empty loom that stood like a reminder of everything she could not do. "I don't understand," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have done this my whole life. I know how to weave, but now I cannot even begin." The old nun listened without interruption. Her eyes were soft, attentive, but there was no urgency in them, no need to fix or solve. When Mara finished, the silence between them lingered, not awkward but spacious. Then gently the nun spoke. "Come," she said, "let us watch the sunset." Mara blinked in confusion. She had expected advice, instructions, perhaps some words of wisdom that would tell her how to overcome her fear. But instead she followed the nun to a small clearing where the horizon opened wide before them. They sat side by side on a smooth stone facing the sky. The sun hovered just above the distant hills, its light spilling across the world in shades of gold, orange, and deep crimson. The clouds shifted slowly, catching the light in ways that seemed almost unreal. It was beautiful, so beautiful that for a moment Mara forgot everything else. She watched as the colors changed, as the light softened, as the sun slowly descended. No two moments were the same. The sky was alive, constantly transforming, never holding still. After a while, the nun spoke again, her voice as quiet as the evening air. "No one asks the sunset to stay," she said. "No one expects it to be the same as yesterday." Mara said nothing. She simply watched. "The beauty of the sunset," the nun continued, "is not in its perfection, but in its impermanence. It does not try to control its colors. It does not worry about whether it is good enough. It simply unfolds." There was a pause, and then the nun turned her gaze toward Mara. "You have been trying to control your weaving," she said gently. "Trying to force it to be only one thing, only beautiful, only perfect, only worthy." Mara felt something shift inside her, though she could not yet name it. "But life does not move that way," the nun said. "It is not something you can hold still, not something you can command. It moves, just like this sky, changing, flowing, becoming something new in every moment." The last edge of the sun slipped below the horizon, and the colors began to fade into soft shades of blue and violet. "You are not the weaver," the nun said softly. "You are the loom." Mara's breath caught slightly. "Life is the weaver," the nun continued. "Joy, fear, inspiration, doubt. These are the threads. You have been trying to choose only the golden ones, to reject the darker colors. But a tapestry made of only one thread has no depth." The words settled into Mara's awareness, not as something to analyze, but as something to feel. "Your problem is not that you are afraid," the nun said. "Your problem is that you believe you should not be." For a long moment, Mara sat in silence. The tension she had been carrying, the constant effort to push away her fear, to control the outcome, to maintain her identity, began to loosen just slightly. She realized that she had been fighting against something natural, trying to eliminate uncertainty, trying to force creativity into a fixed shape, trying to control what was never meant to be controlled. And in that realization there was a quiet release. The sky above them had darkened now, the first stars beginning to appear. The sunset had come and gone without resistance, without hesitation. Mara took a slow breath. For the first time in many days, her hands felt still, not frozen, but calm. Her mind, once filled with noise, seemed to open into a wider space. She did not need to force the next tapestry. She did not need to prove anything. She did not need to be perfect. She only needed to begin, not with certainty, but with presence, not with control, but with openness. When she finally stood to leave, the mountain path no longer felt heavy. There was a quiet steadiness in her steps, as though something within her had realigned. The loom would still be there in the morning. The threads would still be waiting. But this time, she would not approach them as a test she had to pass. She would approach them as a moment to meet. And whatever emerged, light or dark, simple or complex, would be allowed to unfold just like the colors of the sunset. Not controlled, not forced, simply lived. As Mara walked back down the mountain that night, something within her had quietly shifted. The fear had not completely disappeared, nor had the uncertainty of her work. But there was a new space around it, a softness, a willingness to allow things to unfold rather than force them into place. And in that space, she began to sense a deeper truth about life itself, one that extends far beyond her loom, beyond her craft, and into every moment of human experience. This truth is simple yet often difficult to accept. Everything changes. Not just the obvious things, the passing of days, the shifting of seasons, the movement of clouds across the sky, but everything. Our thoughts, our emotions, our bodies, our relationships, even the identities we hold so tightly. All of it is in a constant state of movement. Nothing remains exactly as it was, not even for a single moment. And yet, despite this, there is a part of us that resists. We try to hold on to what feels good. A moment of happiness arises, and we instinctively want it to stay. We cling to it, replay it, wish we could freeze it in time. And when it begins to fade, as it always does, we feel a quiet disappointment, sometimes even a deep sense of loss. At the same time, we push away what feels uncomfortable. A difficult emotion appears, sadness, anger, fear, and we tighten against it. We distract ourselves, avoid it, or tell ourselves that it should not be there. We resist its presence, hoping it will disappear more quickly. But in both cases, whether we are clinging to the pleasant or resisting the unpleasant, we are moving against the natural flow of life. And it is this resistance, more than the change itself, that creates suffering. Imagine trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips through your fingers. The effort to control it only accelerates its loss. But if you soften your hands, if you allow the water to rest gently without grasping, it stays for as long as it can. And when it leaves, it does so without struggle. Life moves in the same way. Every experience arises, lingers for a moment, and then passes. This is not a flaw in reality. It is its nature. The warmth of sunlight on your skin, the sound of laughter, the feeling of connection, even the quiet peace you may be sensing right now. All of it is temporary. And so are the moments of discomfort, the waves of emotion, the periods of uncertainty. Nothing stays, nothing holds still. At first, this truth can feel unsettling. There is a part of us that longs for stability, for something solid we can rely on, something that will not change. We fear loss. We fear endings. We fear the unknown that comes with constant movement. But within this same truth lies a profound freedom. Because if everything is changing, then nothing is fixed. No feeling, no matter how heavy, will last forever. No situation, no matter how difficult, is permanent. No identity, no matter how limiting, defines you completely. Even the moments that feel overwhelming, those times when emotion seems to fill your entire awareness, are part of a process that is already moving, already shifting, already transforming. When we begin to see this clearly, our relationship with experience starts to change. Instead of clinging to what is pleasant, we can learn to appreciate it fully while it is here, knowing it will not last. There is a quiet gratitude in this, a deeper way of enjoying life without trying to possess it. And instead of resisting what is uncomfortable, we can begin to allow it. Not because we like it, but because we understand that it too will pass. We can sit with it, breathe with it, observe it as it moves through us like a storm passing across the sky. This is what it means to accept the flow. It is not passive resignation. It is not giving up or becoming indifferent. It is a gentle alignment with reality, as it is a willingness to move with life rather than against it. You might notice this in small moments. A change in plans, a shift in mood, an unexpected emotion arising. Instead of immediately reacting, trying to fix, control, or escape, you pause, you take a breath, and you allow the moment to be as it is just for a little while. In that pause, something opens, the tension softens, the urgency fades, the experience becomes more spacious. And within that space, there is a quiet peace, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer fighting what is already happening. This is the heart of impermanence. Not something to fear, but something to understand. Not something to resist, but something to move with. Just like the sunset Mara witnessed on the mountain, life is constantly painting itself in new colors, never repeating, never holding still. Its beauty lies not in its permanence, but in its unfolding. And when we stop trying to hold it in place, when we allow it to change as it naturally does, we begin to experience that beauty more deeply. We begin to live not in tension, but in flow, not in resistance, but in quiet acceptance. And in that acceptance, something within us finds rest. In a quiet valley surrounded by low rolling hills, there lived a master potter who whose work was known far beyond the borders of her village. Her name was Isara, and those who encountered her creations often spoke of them not simply as objects, but as something alive vessels that seemed to carry a quiet spirit within their form. Her bowls were smooth, balanced, and elegant, each one shaped with a kind of effortless precision that only comes from years of deep attention. People traveled long distances to own one of her pieces, believing that the harmony of her work might bring a sense of calm into their homes. And for the most part, they were right. There was something undeniably peaceful about the way her pottery held space, simple, grounded, complete. One day, a young apprentice arrived at her workshop. His name was Kaito, and he came with a burning desire to learn. He was talented, dedicated, and eager to prove himself. From the moment he touched the clay, it was clear that he had a natural gift. His hands moved with confidence, his forms took shape quickly, and his progress impressed everyone who watched him. But alongside his talent, there was something else, something more subtle yet far more limiting. Kaito wanted perfection. Not just improvement, not just growth, but absolute flawlessness. He believed that true mastery meant creating a piece with no imperfections, no asymmetry, no trace of error. In his mind, anything less was failure, so he worked tirelessly. Hour after hour, he would sit at the wheel, shaping the clay with intense focus. And often his pieces would come close, almost perfectly round, nearly symmetrical, beautifully formed. But then inevitably he would notice something, a slight curve that leaned too far to one side, a faint ripple along the surface, a tiny imbalance that only he could see. And in that moment, everything would collapse. Frustration would rise, his breath would tighten, and without hesitation he would take the piece, something that others would have considered beautiful, and destroy it, break it apart, start again. The floor of his workspace slowly filled with fragments of discarded attempts, shards of effort, pieces of what might have been enough had he allowed them to be. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. Perfection or nothing. One afternoon, after a particularly long session, Kaito sat back, exhausted. His hands were covered in clay, his shoulders tense, his mind restless. Around him lay the remains of yet another series of broken vessels. No matter how hard he tried, nothing seemed to meet the standard he had set. Across the room, Isara sat quietly at her own wheel. Her movements were different. There was no strain in her posture, no urgency in her hands. She worked with a kind of calm presence, as though she were not forcing the clay into shape, but listening to it, responding to it, moving with it. Kaito watched as she formed a simple vase, elegant, balanced, alive, with subtle character. It was not rigidly perfect, but it held a quiet beauty that felt complete in its own way. As she lifted the vase from the wheel, something unexpected happened. Her hand slipped. A deep crack ran down one side of the vessel. Kaito gasped. To him it was a mistake, a flaw, a ruined piece. He expected her to react with disappointment, perhaps even frustration. But instead, Isara simply paused, looked at the crack and smiled. Without a word, she set the vase aside. Later that day, when the clay had dried, she returned to it. Kaito watched closely as she prepared a fine lacquer mixed with powdered gold. With steady, deliberate movements, she began to trace the crack, filling it not with an attempt to hide it, but to highlight it. The gold shimmered softly against the surface of the clay, following the line of the break, as if it were part of the original design. Kaito stepped closer, confused. "Why would you keep it?" he asked. "It's broken." Isara looked at him gently. "It is not broken," she said. "It has changed." Kaito frowned. "But it's no longer perfect." She nodded. "It was never meant to be." She held the vase up to the light, turning it slowly, so that the golden seam caught the sun. "In this world," she continued, "everything is subject to change. Clay cracks, bodies age, moments pass. When we try to create something that denies this truth, we are working against life itself." Kaito remained silent, listening. "This crack," she said, tracing it lightly with her finger, "is not a mistake. It is part of the story of this piece. It tells us what it has been through, the heat of the kiln, the moment of creation, the shift that occurred. Without it, the vessel would be incomplete. She placed the vase among several others on a nearby shelf. Each one bore its own golden seam, each one unique, each one quietly radiant. "This is kintsugi," she said, "the art of honoring what has been broken, not by hiding it, but by revealing it, by seeing it as something that adds to the beauty, not subtracts from it." Kaito looked at the pieces on the shelf, then at the fragments scattered across his own workspace. For the first time, he saw them differently, not as failures, but as possibilities. He realized that his pursuit of perfection had not brought him closer to mastery, it had kept him stuck. Each time he destroyed a piece, he was not refining his skill, but rejecting the natural imperfections that are part of all creation. He had been trying to create something that could not exist, something untouched by change, something beyond the reality of life. Slowly he reached down and picked up 2 fragments from the floor. They were from a bowl he had discarded earlier that day. Turning them in his hands, he noticed the texture, the shape, the way they still held a certain beauty, even in their broken form. Carefully, he began to fit them together. The crack was still there. It would always be there. But now, instead of seeing it as something to erase, he began to imagine how it might be transformed, how it might become part of the whole. This is the quiet lesson hidden within the story. We often move through life as Kaito did, striving for a kind of perfection that leaves no room for flaws. We try to smooth over our mistakes, hide our wounds, erase the parts of ourselves that feel incomplete. But life does not unfold without cracks. There are moments that break us open, experiences that leave marks, emotions that reshape who we are. And yet within those very fractures lies the potential for something deeper, something more honest, more human, more real. Imperfection is not the opposite of beauty, it is the doorway into it. And when we learn to see our own cracks, not as signs of failure, but as threads in the story of our becoming something shifts, we soften, we allow. We begin to see ourselves not as something that needs to be fixed, but as something that is already whole just as it is. And in that quiet acceptance, a different kind of beauty begins to emerge. Not perfect, but alive. As the understanding of change begins to settle more deeply, another layer of insight quietly reveals itself, one that can feel unfamiliar at first, even unsettling, yet holds a profound sense of freedom when gently explored. It is the teaching often referred to as no self or anatta. At its core, it points to something simple, yet rarely questioned: the idea that the self we believe ourselves to be is not as solid, fixed, or permanent as it seems. From a very early age, we begin to build a sense of I am this kind of person. I like these things. I don't like those things. I succeeded. I failed. I am good at this. I am not good at that. Over time, these thoughts gather into a story, a narrative that feels continuous, stable, and real. And because this story is repeated so often, it begins to feel like something solid, something that exists at the center of our experience, directing our thoughts, making our decisions, defining who we are. But if we pause for a moment and look more closely, something curious begins to emerge. Where exactly is this self? Is it in the body? The body is constantly changing, cells renewing sensations, shifting energy, rising and falling. The body you have today is not the same as it was years ago or even moments ago. Is it in the thoughts? Thoughts appear and disappear on their own. One moment there is a memory, the next a plan, then a random image or a passing worry. They come and go like clouds in the sky, rarely staying long enough to be called stable. Is it in emotions? Emotions too are fluid. Joy can turn into sadness, calm into irritation, confidence into doubt. They rise, they peak, and they fade. So if the body changes, the thoughts change, and the emotions change. What is it that remains fixed? To explore this more deeply, there is an old teaching story, often shared as a simple illustration. A student once approached a wise teacher troubled by the idea of identity. He asked, "What is the self? What is this I that I feel so strongly?" The teacher did not answer directly. Instead, he pointed to a nearby chariot and asked, "What is that?" "It is a chariot," the student replied. The teacher nodded, then began to gently dismantle it. He removed one of the wheels and placed it on the ground. "Is this wheel the chariot?" he asked. "No," the student said. The teacher removed the other wheel, then the axle, then the frame, the seat, the yoke, piece by piece, until all that remained was a collection of separate parts laid out before them. Now the teacher asked, "Where is the chariot?" The student hesitated. Looking at the pieces, he realized something he had not seen before. "The chariot is not a single thing," he said slowly. "It is a collection of parts, a name we give to something that comes together." The teacher smiled. "And so it is with what you call the self." This simple story points to a profound truth. What we call I is not a single, unchanging entity. It is a combination, a dynamic process made up of body sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and awareness, all interacting, all shifting, all constantly changing. We give this process a name. We call it me, but the name does not make it fixed. When we forget this, we begin to hold on to the idea of a solid self. We defend it, protect it, judge it, compare it. We feel threatened when it is criticized and validated when it is praised. We build identities around success, roles, and experiences, and then we suffer when those identities are challenged or begin to change. But when we begin to see that this self is not a fixed thing but a flowing process, something loosens. The need to hold everything together begins to soften. The fear of not being enough starts to fade. The pressure to maintain a perfect image begins to dissolve. Because if there is no fixed self, then there is no fixed failure. If there is no fixed identity, then there is no permanent limitation. You are not a static object. You are a movement, a living, changing expression of countless conditions unfolding moment by moment. This does not mean that you do not exist. It does not mean that nothing matters. Rather, it means that what you are is far more fluid, far more open, far more free than the rigid identity the mind tries to construct. You are not confined to a single story. You are not defined by a single moment. You are not limited to a fixed version of who you have been. And in seeing this, even briefly, there is a quiet sense of relief. The tightness around I begins to ease. The constant need to control, to defend, to prove, softens. What remains is a more spacious way of being, a way of moving through life without the heavy burden of needing to be someone fixed and unchanging. Just as the chariot is not found in any single part, but in the coming together of many conditions, so too is your experience a continuous, unfolding, alive, dynamic, and ever-changing. And when you stop trying to hold that process still, you begin to feel a deeper kind of freedom. As the sense of a fixed, separate self begins to soften, another realization naturally unfolds, one that expands our perspective beyond the boundaries of me and mine. It is the understanding that nothing exists independently. Everything is connected, woven together in a vast and intricate web of causes and conditions. This is the quiet truth of interconnection. At first, this idea may seem abstract, something philosophical or distant, but when we begin to look closely, it reveals itself in the most ordinary moments of life. Imagine for a moment that you are holding a single grain of rice in your hand. It seems small, simple, almost insignificant. But if you pause and look deeply, you begin to see something more. That grain of rice did not appear on its own. It is the result of countless conditions coming together in perfect coordination. There was a farmer who planted the seed, tending the field with care. There was soil rich with nutrients formed over years of natural cycles. There was water rain that fell from clouds, clouds that formed from oceans, oceans that moved with the pull of the moon. There was sunlight traveling millions of miles across space to nourish the growing plant. There were hands that harvested the rice, others who processed it, transported it, cooked it, and placed it before you. In that one small grain, the entire universe is present. The sun, the earth, the water, the labor, the time, all of it exists within it. Without any one of these elements, the grain could not exist as it does now. And when you see this clearly, something shifts. You begin to realize that nothing stands alone. Not the rice, not the trees, not the air you breathe, and not you. Your body too is a convergence of countless conditions. The food you have eaten, the water you have drunk, the air that fills your lungs, all of it comes from the world around you. Your thoughts are shaped by your experiences, your culture, the language you learned, the people you have encountered. Even the way you see yourself has been influenced by countless interactions over time. There is no clear boundary where you end and the world begins. You are not separate from life. You are an expression of it. This understanding gently dissolves the illusion of isolation, the feeling that you are alone, disconnected, moving through a world that is somehow outside of you begins to fade. In its place, there is a sense of belonging, a quiet recognition that you are part of something much larger, something that has always been supporting you in ways you may not have noticed. And with this recognition, another quality naturally arises: compassion. Because when you see that everything is interconnected, the way you relate to others begins to change. You no longer see people as completely separate individuals acting in isolation. Instead, you begin to understand that their actions, their emotions, their struggles are shaped by conditions just as yours are. When someone speaks harshly, you may begin to wonder what pain or pressure lies beneath their words. When someone acts out of anger, you may sense the fear or confusion that gave rise to it. This does not mean that you excuse harmful behavior, but it softens the instinct to judge. It creates space for understanding. Their experience is not entirely separate from yours. In a very real way, their suffering is connected to the same human conditions that shape your own. And so, instead of reacting with resistance or hostility, there is the possibility of responding with clarity and care. This is not something you force. It emerges naturally from seeing clearly. When the illusion of separation fades, the heart opens. You begin to feel that what you do matters not just for yourself, but for the whole. Every word, every action, every small gesture sends ripples outward, touching others in ways you may never fully see. A kind word can ease someone's burden. A moment of patience can prevent conflict. A simple act of awareness can shift the energy of an entire interaction. In the same way, your own well-being is not isolated. It is supported by the well-being of others, by the health of the environment, by the countless visible and invisible forces that sustain life. You are part of this web, not separate from it. And when you begin to live with this awareness, even in small ways, something changes in how you move through the world. You may find yourself pausing before reacting, listening more deeply, acting with a little more care. Not because you are trying to be a better person, but because you see more clearly the connection that already exists. This understanding does not remove difficulty from life. Challenges still arise. Emotions still move. But there is a deeper context now. A sense that you are not facing these experiences alone, but as part of a larger unfolding. The grain of rice, the breath in your lungs, the people you meet, the thoughts that arise, all of it is part of the same continuous flow. Nothing stands apart. And in recognizing this, even briefly, there is a quiet sense of peace. A feeling of being held within something vast, something interconnected, something that has never been separate from you. You are not an isolated fragment in a disconnected world. You are a thread in a living tapestry. And every thread matters. As our journey gently comes to rest, we arrive at a truth that is both simple and deeply practical, a way of living that does not ask for perfection, but for balance. This is often called the middle way, a path that avoids the extremes that so easily pull us out of alignment and into tension. In many ways, our lives are shaped by these extremes. At one end, there is the tendency toward indulgence, the constant pursuit of pleasure, comfort, and distraction. We chase what feels good, hoping it will bring lasting happiness. We fill our time with stimulation, seeking relief from discomfort, always reaching for something more. And yet, no matter how much we gather, there is often a quiet restlessness beneath it all, a sense that it is never quite enough. At the other end, there is the tendency toward force, the urge to control, to discipline, to push ourselves beyond our limits. We strive for perfection, demand more from ourselves, and measure our worth by our productivity or success. We deny our needs, ignore our exhaustion, and believe that through effort alone, we can shape life into exactly what we want it to be. Both of these paths, though different in appearance, lead to the same place in balance. One leaves the mind scattered and unsatisfied. The other leaves it tense and exhausted. The middle way invites something different. It is not a compromise between the two, but a deeper understanding that neither extreme brings true peace. It is a way of living that listens carefully, gently to the present moment, responding not from habit or pressure, but from awareness. Imagine a string on a musical instrument. If it is pulled too tight, it snaps. If it is left too loose, it cannot produce sound. Only when it is held in just the right tension does it create something harmonious. In the same way, our lives find their natural rhythm not in excess and not in suppression, but in balance. This balance is not fixed. It is not something you achieve once and hold on to forever. It is something you feel moment by moment, adjusting as life unfolds. Some days require effort, others require rest. Some moments call for action, others call for stillness. The wisdom lies in knowing the difference. And this knowing does not come from rigid rules or external standards. It comes from a quiet kind of listening, from paying attention to what is happening within you. Before you act, you pause. Before you react, you notice. Before you push forward, you ask, is this coming from clarity or from pressure? In practical terms, this can appear in very simple ways. In your relationship with work, it means giving your energy with focus and care, but also recognizing when it is time to step back, to rest, to restore, not pushing yourself to the point of exhaustion and not avoiding effort altogether, but finding a sustainable rhythm. In your relationship with your body, it means nourishing it, moving it, caring for it, without falling into neglect on one side or obsession on the other, listening to its signals, respecting its limits, and allowing it to guide you. In your emotional life, it means neither suppressing what you feel nor being completely overwhelmed by it. Instead, you allow emotions to arise, to be felt, and to pass without clinging, without resistance. This is the art of balance. It is subtle, it requires awareness, but it is also deeply natural because it aligns with the way life itself moves. When you begin to live in this way, something shifts. The constant struggle to control begins to soften. The need to escape discomfort begins to fade, and in their place there is a quiet steadiness. You are no longer pulled so strongly in one direction or the other. You are able to remain present even as circumstances change. You respond rather than react. You move with life rather than against it. This does not mean that everything becomes easy. Challenges still arise. Uncertainty still appears. But there is a different quality in how you meet them, a sense of groundedness, openness, of trust. And perhaps, most importantly, there is a growing sense that you do not need to force your way toward peace. Peace is not found at the extreme ends of experience. It is found in the space between them, in the gentle middle, in the quiet balance. As you sit here now, breathing softly, you may begin to feel this for yourself, not as an idea, but as a subtle experience, a sense of being neither pushed nor pulled, neither striving nor resisting, just here, just present, just enough. And as this journey comes to a close, you are invited to carry this awareness with you, not as something to hold tightly, but as something to return to again and again. A quiet reminder that you do not need to choose extremes to live fully. You only need to listen and find your balance within the flow of each moment. As we begin this part of the journey, there is an invitation not to strive, not to achieve, but simply to notice. To notice how life often pulls us gently and sometimes forcefully toward extremes. One moment, we are reaching for comfort, for pleasure, for ease, trying to hold on to what feels good just a little longer. And in another moment, we find ourselves pushing, controlling, demanding more from life, from others, from ourselves. These movements are so familiar that we rarely question them. They feel natural, necessary even. But if we pause for a moment and look more closely, we may begin to sense something subtle beneath these patterns, a quiet tension, a restlessness, because neither extreme truly brings us to rest. When we lean too far into indulgence, chasing comfort and avoiding discomfort, there is often a lingering dissatisfaction. The more we consume, the more we want. The more we avoid, the less resilient we become. Pleasure, when clung to, loses its softness and becomes something we depend on, something we fear losing. And when we move toward force, toward control, discipline, and rigid expectation, another kind of tension appears. The body tightens, the mind becomes narrow. Life begins to feel like something to manage, to conquer, to perfect. There is always something more to fix, more to improve, more to get right. And in that constant effort, we quietly lose touch with the simplicity of being. Between these two extremes, there is a different way, a quieter path, one that does not demand perfection and does not encourage escape. It is often called the middle way, not because it is a compromise, but because it is a place of balance, a place where life can be lived fully without being distorted by excess or resistance. To understand this more deeply, imagine a string on a musical instrument. If the string is pulled too tightly, it will snap. If it is too loose, it will not produce any sound. But when the tension is just right, something beautiful happens. The string vibrates in harmony. It produces a tone that is clear, alive, and resonant, not forced, not strained, just naturally in tune. In many ways, our lives are like that string. When we push too hard, we create stress, burnout, and rigidity. When we avoid effort altogether, we fall into stagnation, distraction, and disconnection. But when we learn to find that subtle balance, not too tight, not too loose, there is a different quality of living that begins to emerge. This balance is not something fixed. It is not a perfect point we reach and hold forever. It is something we feel moment by moment. A gentle adjustment, a quiet listening. There are times when life asks for effort, for clarity, for action, for focus. And there are times when life asks for softness, for rest, for acceptance, for letting go. The wisdom of the middle way is in sensing which is needed and responding with awareness rather than habit. And this awareness does not come from forcing yourself to be balanced. It comes from slowing down enough to notice when you are not. You may begin to feel it in your body, the tightness in your chest when you are pushing too hard, the heaviness when you are avoiding something important. These signals are not problems to fix. They are invitations to return, to adjust, to come back to a more natural alignment. Even in this moment, as you read these words, you can gently check in with yourself. Is there tension in your shoulders? Is your breath shallow or strained? Is your mind racing ahead or pulling away? Without judgment, simply notice. And then, if it feels right, allow a small shift, a softening, a deepening of the breath, a release of unnecessary effort, not by force but by permission. This is how the middle way begins, not as a grand decision, but as a series of small conscious adjustments, a willingness to meet each moment as it is, without leaning too far in either direction. As we continue this journey, this sense of balance will become a foundation, not something rigid, but something alive, a quiet center you can return to again and again, because peace is not found at the extremes. It is found in the space between them, in the gentle, steady rhythm of a life lived in balance. And from this place, something new becomes possible, not a life of perfection, but a life of harmony. As we begin to settle into a more balanced way of being, something within us naturally starts to soften. The constant push and pull of extremes begins to ease, and in that gentle space, the heart becomes more available, more open, more receptive. It is here that we are introduced to a practice that is both simple and profoundly transformative: loving kindness, often known as metta. At first, loving kindness may sound like something soft, even fragile. It can be mistaken for a passive emotion, something sentimental or optional, reserved only for moments when we feel calm or generous. But in truth, metta is not a fleeting feeling. It is an active practice, a deliberate cultivation, a quiet but powerful training of the heart. It is the intention to wish well, not just when it is easy, but especially when it is not. Because if we look honestly at our inner world, we begin to notice that much of our suffering does not come from external circumstances alone. It arises from the way we relate to those experiences, from the anger that tightens within us when things do not go our way, from the fear that whispers stories of uncertainty and danger, from the inner voice that judges, criticizes, and tells us we are not enough. These patterns can become so familiar that we no longer question them. They feel like part of who we are, but they are not fixed. They are habits of the mind, learned responses that can, with patience and care, be gently transformed. This is where loving kindness becomes a powerful antidote. When anger arises, metta does not fight it with force. It meets it with warmth. When fear appears, it does not try to suppress it. It offers a sense of safety. When self-criticism speaks harsh and relentless, loving kindness responds with a softer voice, one that says, "You are allowed to be here just as you are." This is not about pretending everything is fine or denying difficult emotions. It is about changing the way we hold them. Instead of tightening around our experience, we begin to hold it with care. Imagine for a moment how you would respond to a close friend who is struggling. You would not meet them with harsh judgment. You would not tell them they are failing or unworthy. You would listen. You would offer support. You would wish for their well-being, even if you could not immediately fix their situation. Metta invites you to extend that same kindness inward. And this can feel unfamiliar at first. Many of us have spent years, even decades, reinforcing a different pattern, one of self-criticism, of pressure, never quite feeling enough. The inner voice that pushes us, that judges us, may seem necessary, even helpful, but over time it creates a quiet exhaustion, a sense of being at war with ourselves. Loving kindness offers another way. It does not demand perfection. It does not require that you feel a certain way before you begin. It simply invites you to plant a seed, a quiet phrase, a gentle intention, a small act of care directed inward, something as simple as, "May I be safe, may I be at peace, may I be well." At first, these words may feel distant, even uncomfortable. The mind may resist questioning their sincerity. That is okay. The practice is not about forcing emotion. It is about setting an intention again and again with patience. Over time, something begins to shift. The hardness softens. The inner dialogue becomes less harsh. A sense of warmth, however subtle, begins to grow. And from that inner shift, your relationship with the world begins to change as well. Because the kindness you cultivate within does not stay contained. It naturally extends outward, into your interactions, into the way you listen, the way you respond, the way you move through life. This is why loving kindness is not just a feeling, it is a way of being. It is a quiet strength, a steady warmth that can meet anger without becoming it, that can hold fear without collapsing into it, that can soften the edges of self-judgment without losing clarity. As we continue, we will see how this practice unfolds in real life, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived transformation. A story of someone who, like many of us, struggled not with the world outside, but with the world within. And how, through the simple, persistent practice of loving kindness, that inner world began to change. In a quiet monastery, nestled deep within a forest, where the air was cool and the sound of rustling leaves carried a natural stillness, there lived a monk named Vimal. From the outside, he appeared disciplined, devoted, and unwavering in his practice. He woke before dawn, meditated for long hours, studied the teachings with precision, and followed every rule with strict attention. To many, he seemed like the very image of a dedicated practitioner. But within him, there was another story unfolding. Vimal's mind was not at peace. Despite his discipline, or perhaps because of the way he approached it, his inner world was harsh and unforgiving. He was quick to judge the other monks around him. One was too careless in his movements, another too lazy in his duties, another too proud in his speech. These judgments arose almost automatically, like a reflex he could not control. Yet even more severe was the way he treated himself. Every small mistake became a source of criticism. If his mind wandered during meditation, he scolded himself. If his posture shifted, he felt he had failed. If a moment of irritation arose, he would tighten with guilt, believing he was not progressing fast enough, not disciplined enough, not worthy enough. His practice, instead of bringing him peace, had become a battlefield. There was no room for softness, no space for understanding, only a constant pressure to be better, to do more, to eliminate every flaw. And over time, this inner tension began to wear him down. One day, his teacher, an old monk with a calm and steady presence, observed Vimal closely. He saw not just the effort, but the strain beneath it. He saw a heart that had become rigid, a mind that was trying too hard to control itself. Calling Vimal aside, the teacher spoke gently. "Your discipline is strong," he said, "but your heart is dry." Vimal lowered his gaze, unsure how to respond. "You are trying to perfect the mind," the teacher continued, "but you have forgotten how to care for it." Then, after a brief pause, he gave Vimal a simple instruction. "For the next week," he said, "set aside your usual practices. Each day, you will walk slowly through the forest, and as you walk, you will repeat these words, 'May I be happy, may I be at peace.'" Vimal was confused. "This is too simple," he thought. "How can repeating words bring any real change? I need more discipline, not less." But he respected his teacher, and so reluctantly he agreed. The next morning he began. As he walked along the forest path, he repeated the phrases under his breath. "May I be happy, may I be at peace." The words felt empty. There was no warmth behind them, no sense of sincerity. In fact, they seemed almost false. His mind resisted them, pushing back with familiar thoughts. "Happy, I am not happy. Peaceful, my mind is restless." The phrases clashed with his internal experience, and the tension only seemed to increase. He felt impatient, even irritated by the exercise. But he continued. Day after day he walked the same path, repeating the same words. At first nothing seemed to change. The resistance was still there. The judgment still arose. The inner voice of criticism remained loud and persistent. And yet something subtle was happening beneath the surface. One afternoon as he walked, he noticed a small bird resting on a branch. It seemed fragile, alert, yet at ease in its environment. For a moment his attention rested fully on it. There was no judgment, no analysis, just a simple awareness. And in that moment when he repeated the phrase, "May I be at peace," it felt slightly different. Not entirely true, but not entirely false either. Just a little softer. Encouraged though, he did not fully understand why he continued the practice. Over the following days, he began to notice small shifts. The forest seemed more alive. The sound of leaves under his feet, the light filtering through the trees, the rhythm of his breath, all of it became more vivid, more present. And his inner world, though still active, began to lose some of its sharpness. The critical voice was still there, but it was not as overwhelming. There were brief moments, just moments when it quieted, when something else could be felt. A sense of space, a hint of warmth. One day he saw another monk struggling to carry a heavy bundle of wood. Instinctively, the familiar judgment arose. He should be stronger, more capable. But before the thought could fully take hold, something else appeared. A simple wish. May he be at ease? Vimal paused. This was new. There was no effort in it, no forcing. It arose naturally, gently, without resistance. He stepped forward and helped the monk without saying a word. As they worked together, he noticed something he had not felt in a long time, a quiet sense of connection. That evening, as he sat in stillness, the phrases returned. May I be happy, may I be at peace. And this time, they felt different, not perfect, not complete, but real enough to touch. He began to understand that the practice was not about forcing himself to feel something he did not feel. It was about creating space for something new to grow. The harshness within him, built over years of striving and judgment, did not disappear overnight, but it began to soften, like ice slowly melting in the warmth of spring. When the week came to an end, Vimal returned to his teacher. "How was your practice?" the old monk asked. Vimal paused before answering. "I thought I needed to control my mind," he said slowly, "but I see now. I was only making it tighter." And now, the teacher asked. Vimal took a breath. Now I am learning to be with it. More gently. The teacher nodded. This is the beginning. Vimal's story reminds us of something essential. Transformation does not always come through force. It does not come from pushing harder or trying to eliminate every imperfection. Sometimes it begins with something much simpler, a small shift in how we relate to ourselves, a willingness to meet our own experience not with judgment but with kindness. And from that place, change unfolds. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, from the inside out. As the story of Vimal gently fades, it leaves behind a quiet question, one that does not demand an immediate answer, but invites reflection. How do you speak to yourself when no one else is listening? For many of us, there is a voice within that has been there for so long we hardly notice it anymore. It comments, evaluates, compares, corrects. It tells us when we are not doing enough, not being enough, not living up to some invisible standard. This voice is often called the inner critic, and while it may have once arisen as a way to protect us or push us forward, it can quietly become one of the deepest sources of our suffering. It is not loud in an obvious way. It does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. A small thought after a mistake that wasn't good enough. A quiet comparison. Others are doing better than you. A subtle judgment. You should have handled that differently. These thoughts may seem harmless, even helpful, but over time they accumulate. They create a background tension, a sense that we are always slightly falling short. And in that tension, we begin to relate to ourselves, not with care, but with pressure. We become both the one who struggles and the one who judges the struggle. This division within us can be exhausting, and yet we rarely question it. We assume that being hard on ourselves is necessary, that without this critical voice we would become lazy, careless, or lost. But if we look closely, we may begin to see that this harshness does not actually lead to clarity or growth. Instead, it often leads to fear, avoidance, and a quiet sense of unworthiness. This is why the practice of self-compassion is so essential. It is not a luxury, it is not indulgence, it is a foundation. To practice self-compassion is to begin relating to yourself in a fundamentally different way. Instead of meeting your experience with judgment, you meet it with understanding. Instead of tightening around your imperfections, you allow space for them. This does not mean ignoring your mistakes or pretending everything is fine. It means acknowledging what is real while holding it with kindness. Imagine again how you would respond to a close friend who is struggling. If they came to you feeling overwhelmed, ashamed, or uncertain, you would not respond with criticism. You would not say, "You should have done better." You would listen. You would offer support. You would remind them that they are still worthy even in their difficulty. Self-compassion is simply the willingness to offer that same care inward. And yet, for many people, this is the hardest step. There can be resistance, a feeling that kindness must be earned, that we only deserve care once we have fixed everything that is wrong. But this way of thinking keeps us trapped. It creates a cycle where we withhold compassion from ourselves, waiting for a version of ourselves that does not need it anymore. But it is precisely when we feel most imperfect that compassion is most needed. This is the turning point. To recognize that you do not need to become better in order to be treated kindly, especially by yourself. You can begin right where you are, perhaps with something very simple. A pause when you notice self-criticism arising. A gentle acknowledgement, "This is difficult." A quiet response, "May I be patient with myself?" These small moments matter. They interrupt the habitual pattern of judgment and create space for something new to emerge. Over time, this shift changes the way you experience your own mind. The inner critic may still appear, but it no longer holds the same authority. It becomes something you can notice rather than something you must obey. And alongside it, another voice begins to grow, softer, steadier, more supportive. A voice that says, "It's okay to be learning." A voice that says, "You are allowed to be human. This does not weaken you. It strengthens you, because when you are not constantly at war with yourself, your energy becomes available for something else. Clarity, presence, creativity, connection. You are no longer using your strength to fight against your own experience. You are using it to meet life more fully, and something else begins to unfold. When you learn to hold your own imperfections with kindness, it becomes easier to extend that same understanding to others. You recognize that just as you are shaped by your experiences, your struggles, your fears, so are they. Compassion becomes less of an effort and more of a natural response. But it all begins here, with the willingness to soften, with the courage to meet yourself not as a problem to be solved, but as a human being to be understood. Self-compassion is not about becoming someone new. It is about changing the way you relate to the person you already are. And in that shift, something quiet and profound begins to heal. Not all at once, but steadily, gently, from within. As the practice of kindness begins to take root within it, does not remain contained. Like a gentle warmth spreading through the body, it naturally seeks to extend beyond the boundaries of the self. What begins as a quiet wish, may I be safe, may I be at peace, slowly opens into something wider, something more inclusive. This is the unfolding of compassion, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. At first, it feels most natural to direct this kindness toward ourselves. This is where the practice begins, because without a foundation of self-compassion, the heart remains guarded. But as that inner relationship softens, the circle can begin to expand. The next step is often towards someone we love. A close friend, a family member, a person who easily evokes warmth in us. We bring them to mind, perhaps imagining their face, their presence, and we offer the same simple phrases. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. In this space, the practice feels almost effortless. The heart responds naturally. There is no resistance, only a quiet flow of care. From there, the circle widens further. We bring to mind a neutral person, someone we see in passing but do not know deeply. Perhaps a shopkeeper, a neighbor, a stranger we cross paths with during the day. At first, it may feel less personal. There is no strong emotional connection. But this is precisely where the practice deepens. We begin to recognize that this person too has a life as complex as our own. They have joys, worries, hopes, and fears, most of which we will never see. And in acknowledging this shared humanity, something softens. The phrase arises again, may you be well. It may feel quiet, even faint at first, but with repetition, it becomes more sincere, more real. Then comes the most challenging step. We bring to mind someone difficult, someone with whom we have tension, conflict, or unresolved pain. This may be a person who has hurt us, misunderstood us, or simply someone we find hard to be around. The mind may resist immediately. It may say, they don't deserve kindness, or why should I wish them well? And this is where the practice reveals its true depth. Loving kindness is not about approving harmful behavior. It is not about forgetting or denying the pain that has occurred. It is about recognizing that this person, like all beings, is shaped by causes and conditions. Their actions, however, difficult arise from their own struggles, their own fears, their own suffering. To offer them kindness is not to excuse what they have done. It is to release the burden of hatred from your own heart. Because holding on to anger, resentment, or bitterness does not harm them as much as it weighs on you. It creates tension, contraction, and distance within your own experience. So gently, without forcing you, offer the same wish. May you be free from suffering. It may feel mechanical at first. That is okay. The practice is not about generating a perfect emotional response. It is about planting a seed, an intention that gradually transforms the way the heart relates to difficulty. And as this practice continues, the boundaries that once felt so solid begin to soften. The division between us and them, between those we care about and those we reject, begins to dissolve. Not all at once, but gradually, through repeated moments of awareness and intention. Finally, the circle expands beyond individuals. It opens to include all beings, those we know and those we will never meet, those near and those far, those living in comfort and those in pain. We begin to sense the vastness of life, the countless experiences unfolding at this very moment across the world. And from that awareness, a simple wish arises, not directed at any one person, but offered to all. May all beings be safe. May all beings be happy. May all beings live with ease. This is not a grand gesture. It is a quiet orientation of the heart, and yet it changes everything. Because when we begin to live from this place, our actions naturally follow. We speak with more care. We listen more deeply. We respond rather than react. Even small interactions carry a different quality, one shaped not by judgment, but by understanding. This does not mean that life becomes free of conflict. Differences still exist. Boundaries are still necessary, but the underlying attitude shifts. We no longer see others as separate opposing forces. We begin to see them as part of the same unfolding process of life, just like us. In this way, compassion becomes more than a practice. It becomes a way of being, a quiet recognition that beneath all differences, there is a shared longing to be happy, to be free from suffering, to be at peace. And when we align with that recognition, even in small moments, we participate in something deeply meaningful. We help soften the world, not by changing everything at once, but by changing the way we meet it. One breath, one intention, one act of kindness at a time. As the heart gradually opens through kindness and compassion, another quiet realization begins to emerge, one that does not ask us to become anything new, but to recognize something that has always been here. Beneath the movement of thoughts, beneath the waves of emotion, beneath even the stories we tell about ourselves, there is a deeper layer of experience, a stillness, a clarity, a presence that remains untouched. This is often described as the luminous mind, your true nature. At first, this idea can feel abstract. The mind is so accustomed to identifying with its contents that it rarely pauses to notice the space in which those contents arise. Thoughts appear, and we believe them. Emotions arise, and we feel consumed by them. Memories, replay plans, unfold, worries, circle, and in all of this movement, it seems as though the mind itself is constantly changing, unstable, even chaotic. But what if the mind is not the chaos? What if the chaos is only what passes through it? Imagine looking up at the sky on a day when clouds are heavy and dark. The clouds move quickly, the wind shifts them, and at times it may seem as though the sky itself is troubled. But the sky is not the storm. The sky is the vast open space in which the storm appears. No matter how thick the clouds become, no matter how long they stay, they never stain the sky. They never damage its openness. When the clouds pass, the sky remains exactly as it has always been, clear, spacious, untouched. In the same way, your awareness is like that sky. Thoughts are like clouds appearing, changing shape, dissolving. Emotions are like weather patterns, sometimes calm, sometimes intense, but always moving. Even the most overwhelming experiences, when seen clearly, are not permanent states. They arise, they stay for a while, and they pass. And yet something remains constant. The knowing of the experience, the awareness that notices the thought, the awareness that feels the emotion, the awareness that is present in every moment, quietly observing. This awareness does not come and go in the same way that thoughts and feelings do. It is always here, even when it is not recognized. It does not need to be created, improved, or purified. It is already whole. This is what is meant by the luminous mind. Not something distant or special, but something immediate and accessible. Something that does not depend on circumstances. Even when the mind feels restless, the awareness that knows restlessness is still present. Even when there is sadness, the awareness that recognizes sadness is not itself sad. Even when there is confusion, the awareness that sees confusion is clear. This does not mean that difficult experiences disappear. It means that we begin to relate to them differently. Instead of being completely identified with every thought or emotion, we begin to notice them as movements within a larger space. And in that space, there is a quiet peace. Not the kind of peace that depends on everything going well, but a deeper peace that exists even when things are uncertain. A peace that comes not from controlling experience, but from recognizing the nature of awareness itself. Many of us spend our lives trying to create peace, seeking the right conditions, the right outcomes, the right environment. We believe that if we can just arrange things correctly, peace will follow. But this search can become endless because conditions are always changing. The teaching of the luminous mind offers a different perspective. Peace is not something you need to build. It is something you uncover. It has always been here, beneath the noise, beneath the movement, beneath the habits of the mind. It is not absent, it is simply unnoticed. And the practice is not to force the mind to be quiet, but to gently recognize the quiet that is already present. You may begin to notice this in small ways. In the brief pause between one thought and the next. In the stillness at the end of an exhale, before the next breath begins. In the moment of simple awareness, when you are fully present without effort. These glimpses may be subtle, fleeting at first, but they point to something real, a quality of being that is not disturbed by the changing content of experience, a presence that does not need to defend itself, improve itself, or prove itself. And as you become more familiar with this, something shifts. The need to fix yourself begins to soften. The sense of being broken or incomplete begins to dissolve. The constant effort to become something else begins to relax. Because you start to see that beneath all the layers of conditioning, there is nothing fundamentally wrong with you. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a space in which life is unfolding. A space that is open, aware, and quietly at peace. This is not something you need to achieve. It is something you can return to again and again, simply by noticing, by pausing, by allowing yourself to rest even briefly as the awareness that is already here. And in that resting, the clouds may still move, but the sky remains clear, spacious, unchanged. There is an old story, simple in its telling, yet profound in its meaning, about a man who spent his entire life believing he was poor. He wandered from place to place, his clothes worn, and patched his body tired from years of hardship. Each day was a quiet struggle, finding food, seeking shelter, enduring the uncertainty that followed him wherever he went. In his mind, he was defined by lack. He saw the world as something that had given him very little, and he saw himself as someone who had very little to offer in return. One evening, exhausted from his journey, he fell asleep by the side of a quiet road. As he slept, an old friend happened to pass by a wealthy merchant who had once known him in better times. Seeing the man in such a state, the merchant's heart filled with compassion. He wanted to help, not in a small way, but in a way that would change his friend's life completely. The merchant carried with him a rare and precious jewel, a diamond of extraordinary clarity and brilliance worth more than the man could have imagined. Not wanting to wake him and create confusion or resistance, the merchant quietly knelt beside his sleeping friend and carefully sewed the diamond into the inner lining of his worn coat, hidden but secure. Then, with a silent wish for his friend's well-being, he continued on his journey. When the man awoke, nothing seemed different. The road was the same. His clothes were the same. The hunger in his body was the same. And so, without realizing anything had changed, he continued his life exactly as before. He wandered through towns and villages asking for scraps, feeling the same sense of lack, the same quiet despair. Years passed. The diamond remained with him the entire time, resting close to his heart, yet completely unknown to him. He never thought to look. He never imagined that something of such value could already belong to him. One day, by chance, he encountered the same merchant again. The merchant was shocked to see him still living in poverty, still burdened by the same struggles. "My friend," the merchant said, his voice filled with concern, "why are you still living like this? I gave you a treasure that should have freed you from all of this." The man looked at him in confusion. "You gave me nothing," he replied. "I have had nothing all these years." Gently, the merchant stepped closer. He took hold of the man's coat and carefully opened the inner seam. As the stitching loosened, the diamond slipped into his hand, catching the light in a way that seemed almost unreal. It shimmered with a brilliance the man had never seen before, clear, radiant, unmistakably precious. For a long moment, the man could not speak. Everything he believed about himself, his poverty, his limitations, his sense of lack, suddenly came into question. He had been carrying immense wealth all along, yet had lived as though he had nothing, not because the wealth was absent, but because it was unseen. This story is not just about a man and a hidden jewel. It is a reflection of our own experience. In many ways, we move through life just as he did. We define ourselves by what we think we lack: confidence, worth, clarity, peace. We look outward, searching for something that will complete us, something that will finally make us feel whole. And in that search, we often overlook what is already present. The teachings speak of something called Buddha nature, a fundamental quality within each of us that is whole, luminous, and complete. It is not something we need to acquire or build. It is something that is already here, woven into the very fabric of our being. Like the diamond, it does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply rests quietly, waiting to be recognized. And yet we spend so much time identifying with the outer coat, our thoughts, our fears, our roles, our past experiences. We believe the stories that arise in the mind: I am not enough, I am broken, I need to become something more. These stories can feel convincing, especially when repeated over time. But they are not the full truth. They are layers, temporary, shifting, incomplete. Beneath them, there is something untouched, a clarity that is not diminished by confusion, a kindness that is not erased by anger, a peace that is not destroyed by restlessness. This is the hidden wealth. To recognize it does not require dramatic effort. It does not come from forcing the mind into silence or achieving some ideal state. It begins with a simple shift in attention, a willingness to look inward, to question the assumptions we have about ourselves, to notice the awareness that is already present beneath the noise. You might begin by asking gently, what is it that is aware of this moment? Not looking for an intellectual answer, but feeling into the experience itself. The awareness that knows your thoughts is not limited by those thoughts. The presence that feels your emotions is not confined by those emotions. That presence is already whole, already enough, already complete. The path, then, is not about becoming someone new. It is about discovering what has always been here. Just as the man did not need to earn the diamond, but only to recognize it, we do not need to create our true nature. We only need to see it. And once it is seen, even briefly, something shifts. The sense of lack begins to loosen. The constant striving begins to soften. The search begins to quiet. Because what you were looking for was never truly missing. It was simply hidden, waiting patiently, quietly, for the moment you would finally look within and recognize the treasure you have always carried. As we begin to recognize the quiet presence beneath our thoughts, the stillness that has always been here, we naturally ask a simple question: how do we stay connected to this? How do we return to this clarity in the midst of daily life, when the mind is pulled in many directions, when distractions arise, when emotions begin to move? This is where the practice becomes essential. Two qualities form the foundation of this path: mindfulness and concentration. Mindfulness is the art of awareness. It is the simple, direct knowing of what is happening in the present moment, without judgment, without resistance. It is the ability to notice a thought as a thought, a feeling as a feeling, a sensation as a sensation, not adding anything, not taking anything away, just seeing clearly. Concentration, on the other hand, is the quality of stability. It is the capacity to keep the attention steady, to remain with an object of awareness without being pulled away again and again. If mindfulness is the light that illuminates experience, concentration is what keeps that light from flickering. Together, they create a powerful balance. Awareness without stability becomes scattered. Stability without awareness becomes dull. But when both are present, something begins to align. To understand this more deeply, imagine an archer preparing to release an arrow. She stands still, grounded, her body relaxed yet alert. Around her there may be noise, voices, wind, movement, but her attention is not scattered. It is gathered, focused. Her breath is steady, her mind clear. She is not thinking about the past nor worrying about the future. In that moment, there is only the target, the bow, the breath. If her mind drifts even slightly, the arrow will miss its mark. If her body is tense, the movement will be forced. If her attention is weak, the aim will be unstable. But when awareness and stability come together, something changes. There is no effort in the usual sense, no strain, just a quiet alignment. And in that alignment, the arrow releases effortlessly. This is the quality we are cultivating. Not a rigid control of the mind, but a collected presence. A state where attention is both aware and steady, open and grounded. The simplest and most direct way to begin this practice is through the breath. Wherever you are, you can take a moment to pause. Allow your body to settle. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath return to its natural rhythm. There is no need to change it, no need to breathe in a special way. Just notice. Feel the sensation of the breath as it enters the body, perhaps at the nostrils where the air feels cool as it comes in and warm as it leaves, or in the rise and fall of the chest or abdomen, a gentle movement that continues on its own. Place your attention there, not forcing it, not holding it tightly, just resting it as you might rest your hand on a surface. And as you do this, something very natural will happen. The mind will wander. It will move into thoughts, plans, memories, distractions. This is not a mistake. It is the nature of the mind. The practice is not to prevent this, but to notice it. The moment you realize, I am thinking, is a moment of mindfulness. And in that moment, you gently return. No judgment, no frustration, just a simple redirection of attention back to the breath. This movement away and back again is the heart of the practice. Each time you return, you strengthen both awareness and stability. Over time, the mind begins to settle not because you force it to, but because it is no longer constantly pulled in every direction. Like a jar of muddy water, left undisturbed, the particles slowly sink and the water becomes clear. And in that clarity, you begin to see more deeply. You see thoughts arising and passing. You see emotions changing and dissolving. You see the impermanent flowing nature of experience. This is not something you need to believe. It becomes something you directly observe. And the practice does not end when you stand up from stillness. Mindfulness can be carried into every part of your life. When you are walking, you can feel the contact of your feet with the ground. When you are eating, you can taste the food, notice the texture, the act of nourishment. When you are listening to someone, you can give them your full attention without preparing your response. These small moments are not separate from the practice. They are the practice. They are opportunities to return again and again to the present moment, to step out of the constant stream of thinking and into direct experience. And as this becomes more familiar, something begins to change. You are less easily pulled into distraction, less reactive to passing thoughts, more grounded in what is actually happening. There is a sense of steadiness, even in the midst of movement. Not because life has become simpler, but because your relationship to it has shifted. You are no longer lost in the mind's endless commentary. You are present, aware, here. And in that presence, the quiet clarity you have been seeking is no longer something distant. It is something you are living moment by moment, breath by breath. There is a teaching often shared in a quiet, almost understated way, a story so simple that it can easily be overlooked, and yet so profound that it has the power to reshape how we understand the entire path. It is the story of the raft. Imagine a person traveling through a vast and unfamiliar landscape. After many days of walking, they come upon a wide river. The water is deep, the current strong, and there is no bridge in sight. On the side where they stand, the land is difficult, filled with danger, uncertainty, and hardship. But on the far shore, they can see something different. The land appears peaceful, safe, inviting. Naturally, they wish to cross. So they gather what is available: branches, leaves, pieces of wood, and with patience and effort, they construct a simple raft. It is not perfect, but it is enough. With care, they place it on the water, climb aboard, and begin to paddle. The crossing is not easy. The current resists them, the raft shifts beneath them, and at times it feels uncertain. But slowly, steadily, they make their way across. And finally, after great effort, they reach the other side. They step onto solid ground, safe, relieved, grateful. Now imagine what happens next. The person looks back at the raft, the very thing that carried them across, that supported them, that made the journey possible. A sense of appreciation arises. Without it, they would not be here. So they think to themselves, "This raft has been incredibly useful. It has served me well. I should not leave it behind." And so they lift the raft onto their back and begin walking. At first, this may seem like a gesture of gratitude, but as they continue, the weight becomes clear. The raft is heavy. It slows them down. It makes each step more difficult. The path ahead, which was once open and free, now feels burdened. What was once helpful has become a hindrance. And this is the heart of the teaching. In life, we all build rafts. Beliefs, identities, practices, achievements, relationships. These can all serve as ways to carry us through difficult times. They help us grow, understand, and move forward. In many ways, they are essential, but the problem arises when we begin to cling to them. When we hold on to something, not because it is needed, but because we are afraid to let it go. When we continue to carry what once served us, even when it no longer does, this clinging creates weight. It creates tension. It keeps us tied to the past, to fixed ideas of who we are and how things should be. You may notice this in your own experience. Perhaps there is a belief you once held that helped you make sense of the world, but now feels limiting. Perhaps there is an identity you have carried, something you worked hard to become, but now feels restrictive. Perhaps there is even a way of thinking about yourself that no longer reflects who you are becoming, and yet letting go can feel difficult. There is a sense of attachment, of familiarity. Even when something is no longer helpful, it can feel safer to hold on to it than to step into the unknown. But the truth is, freedom does not come from accumulating more. It comes from releasing. Letting go does not mean rejecting or denying what has been. It does not mean that the raft was a mistake. On the contrary, it honors the role it played. It recognizes that it was useful, that it served its purpose. But it also recognizes that its purpose has been fulfilled. And so with gratitude, it is set down. This is the subtle art of letting go. It is not forceful. It is not abrupt. It is a gentle recognition this is no longer needed. And in that recognition, there is a quiet willingness to release. You may begin to practice this in small ways, noticing when you are holding on to a thought that has already passed, noticing when you are replaying a moment that cannot be changed, noticing when you are clinging to an expectation that is causing tension. And in those moments you pause, you breathe, and you allow the grip to soften. You do not push the thought away. You do not force it to disappear. You simply stop holding on to it, like opening your hand and letting something fall. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. The mind is accustomed to holding, to controlling, to managing. But with practice, something begins to shift. The space within you grows. The heaviness begins to lift. And what remains is a sense of lightness, not because life has become easier, but because you are no longer carrying more than you need to. This is freedom, not a dramatic escape from life, but a quiet release from unnecessary burden. The person in the story does not need the raft once they have crossed the river. And in the same way, we do not need to carry every belief, every identity, every past experience with us into the future. We can honor them. We can learn from them. And then, when the time is right, we can let them go, not because they were wrong, but because we are ready to move forward. And in that movement, unburdened and open, there is a deeper ease, a quieter presence, a freedom that does not come from holding on, but from finally, gently letting go. As this journey gently comes to its deepest point, we arrive at a teaching that can feel both subtle and vast, something that cannot be grasped in the usual way, yet can be quietly understood through direct experience. It is often called emptiness or shunyata, and despite how it may sound, it does not point to nothingness or absence. It points to something far more liberating, the absence of a fixed, independent existence. At first, the mind may resist this idea. We are so accustomed to seeing the world in solid terms. This is a thing that is a person. This is me. Everything appears separate, defined, and self-contained. But when we begin to look more closely, this sense of solidity starts to soften. Take a simple object like a cup. At first glance, it seems complete on its own, a single thing existing independently. But if you pause and reflect, you begin to see that the cup is not just a cup. It is made of many conditions. Clay shaped by hands, fire from a kiln that hardened its form, water that once softened the earth, the labor of those who created it, the space it occupies. Even the concept of cup itself is something the mind assigns. Without these conditions, the cup could not exist as it does. So where exactly is the cup? Is it in the clay, in the shape, in the name? Or is it something that arises from the coming together of all these elements? In the same way, consider a wave in the ocean. When you look at it, you might say, that is a wave. It has a beginning, a rising, a crest, and an end. It seems distinct, separate from the rest of the water. But if you look more deeply, you begin to see that the wave is not separate from the ocean. It is the ocean expressing itself in a particular form. The wave does not have an independent existence. It depends on the water, the wind, the movement of the ocean, the pull of the moon. It arises due to conditions, and when those conditions change, the wave dissolves back into the ocean. At no point was it ever separate. This is the essence of emptiness. Not that things do not exist, but that they do not exist in the way we often assume. They are not fixed, independent, or permanent. They are fluid, interconnected, and constantly arising through conditions. And this includes what we call the self. Just like the cup, just like the wave, what we experience as I is not a solid, unchanging entity. It is a process, a flow of thoughts, sensations, memories, perceptions, all coming together moment by moment. When we do not see this clearly, we cling. We try to hold on to things as if they were permanent. We fear losing what we believe defines us. We resist change because it feels like something essential is being taken away. But when we begin to understand emptiness, not just as an idea, but as a lived experience, something profound shifts. The fear begins to loosen. Because if nothing exists independently, then nothing can be truly lost in the way we imagine. Forms change, experiences pass, identities evolve. But the underlying flow continues. The wave does not fear disappearing because it has never been separate from the ocean. And in the same way, when we see our own nature more clearly, the tight grip of fear begins to soften. We no longer need to hold on to things so desperately. We no longer need to define ourselves in rigid ways. There is a sense of openness, a sense of freedom, not because everything is under control, but because we are no longer trying to control what is inherently fluid. This does not mean that life loses its meaning. In fact, it often becomes more vivid, more immediate. When we are not clinging, we can experience things more fully. We can appreciate moments without trying to make them last. We can meet change without fear. The cup is empty, and because it is empty, it can hold water. The wave is empty, and because it is empty, it can rise and fall freely. You are empty, and because of that, you are not confined to a fixed identity. You are open, dynamic, alive. This is not something to grasp, but something to gently notice. In the space between thoughts, in the flow of breath, in the quiet awareness that observes without holding. And as this understanding deepens even slightly, the sense of struggle begins to fade. What remains is a quiet ease, a freedom that does not depend on circumstances, a way of being that is light open and at peace with the changing nature of life, not because nothing matters, but because everything is allowed to be exactly as it is without needing to be held too tightly.